9 years. From the spring I turned 15 to the November I handed back my keys, I did not own a single thought I could write down and keep. My father gave me my first phone the year I started pioneering on Saturdays, and he handed it to me with one sentence: "There is nothing on here your father cannot see." I was 15. I believed him completely. I was baptized at 14 in the Decatur West congregation, married at 18 to a brother my father blessed, and for 9 years the question of whether a woman may keep one message to herself was answered before I was ever old enough to ask it. Before I tell you about the night my husband read 3 months of my messages out loud while I watched, I need you to understand the doctrine behind it. They call it headship. The organization teaches that a wife has no spiritual life apart from the man who is her head, that secrecy is the doorway to sin, and a faithful sister has nothing to hide. It does not read like surveillance. It reads like protection. That is the whole trick of it. I will tell you what was done and what I finally did, but first you have to sit in the house with me. If you grew up in a kingdom hall where the men could read everything and the women could keep nothing, stay in this room with me. Subscribe, not for me, but so the next young sister in a house where the phone in her hand is not her own hears one voice say it out loud. Tell me in the comments which house you grew up in. I will tell you about mine. I want to start with the phone because that is where the watching started, and the watching started as a kind of love. I was 15. It was a Saturday in the spring, and we were getting ready for field service, the door-to-door work, the ministry. My father, William Bennett, was a ministerial servant at Decatur West, a UPS driver 6 days a week, and a servant of the congregation on the 7th, and he was not a hard man. I need you to hear that. He was quiet, and he was tired, and he loved me in the only grammar the truth had ever taught him. He put a phone in my hand at the kitchen table in our brick ranch house off Memorial Drive, and he told me it was so I could reach him between calls, and then he told me the rule. Nothing on here is hidden from your father. He did not say it like a threat. He said it like he was handing me an umbrella. He believed he was keeping me out of the rain. I remember the kitchen smelled like the coffee my mother brewed for the field service group that came by on Saturdays, and my ministry bag was already waiting for me by the door. And I did not flinch, because I had already been raised inside the logic of it. In the truth you are taught from the time you can read that Jehovah sees everything, that there is no thought, no message, no quiet corner of you that is hidden from him. So when my father said there was nothing on my phone he could not see, it only sounded like a smaller, closer version of something I already knew to be the shape of the whole universe. God reads everything. Your father is God's arrangement over you. Therefore, your father reads everything. It was not cruelty. It was geometry. I did not argue with the geometry of the sky. I kept a notebook in those years, a cloth-bound Bible study notebook, the kind the sisters carried. I started it the year I was baptized, and I wrote in it for 10 years. It was the closest thing I had to a diary, except that I knew, even at 15, even at 17, that it was not a diary. Because a diary is a room with a door, and what I had was a room with a window that any head over me could look through whenever he chose. I wrote my prayers in it. I wrote the things I could not say in the car on the way home from the meeting. And I learned. This is the part I did not understand until I was 25. I learned to write them in a code I invented for myself, to soften them, to bury the real sentence under a scripture, so that if my father read it, and later if my husband read it, they would find a faithful sister and not a frightened girl. I was editing my own private notebook for an audience. I did not even know I was doing it. That is what 9 years of being read does to you. You start writing for the watcher before the watcher ever asks. When I married Trey Coleman in October of 2018, I was 18 and the headship over me simply changed hands. That is the only honest way I know to describe it. My father walked me to the front of a rented hall, and a brother gave the talk about the Christian household and the order of things. The head of the woman is the man, the way it is read at every witness wedding, and when it was done, the phone that had belonged to my father's oversight belonged to my husband's. Nobody announced that part. There is no ceremony for it. But Trey knew, and I knew, that whatever my father had been allowed to see, Trey was now allowed to see, and more, because a husband's headship is closer than a father's. We had courted for 10 chaperoned months. We had never once been alone in a room long enough to whisper, and now we shared an apartment and a bank account and a phone plan where his name was the primary line, and I understood, without anyone saying it, that the privacy I had never had as a daughter was not going to begin now that I was a wife. Let me step back from my own house and show you the machine, because if I only tell you my story, you will think this was about one quiet man and one watchful father. It was not one man, it was the design. The doctrine is called headship, and in the organization it is not a metaphor. The husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the congregation. That is the verse, and I am not here to argue with the verse. I am here to tell you what they built on top of it. They built a whole architecture of visibility. In the Elder's Manual, Shepherd the Flock of God, the men are taught how to look into a household, how to ask, what to require. A wife who keeps a separate account, a separate password, a friendship the head does not know about. These are not her own business. They are spiritual warning signs. A sister with nothing to hide hides nothing. And so the absence of privacy is never felt as a loss. It is taught as a virtue. They made the cage feel like a crown, and they made the woman polish it herself. And here's the part it took me years to see. It was not only the men watching the women. It was everyone watching everyone and reporting upward. The two-witness rule, the shepherding calls, the way a sister was encouraged to bring a concern about another sister to the elders for that sister's own good. The whole congregation was a single eye. I grew up inside that eye, and I mistook it for the warmth of being known. We called it love. We called it Jehovah's loving arrangement. What it was a black majority hall in Decatur, built by the brothers of the area with their own hands in 1987, the year before my grandfather stopped pioneering, where no woman had a thought of her own that some man over her was not entitled to read. I will get to the night Trey read my phone. I promise you I will. But first you have to meet the woman who could have warned me, and almost did. My Aunt Diane could have told me all of this when I was 19. She tried. Diane is my mother's older sister. She came into the truth in 1980, a teenager, baptized at 16, and she married an elder named Robert Coleman in 1986, and she stayed in that marriage 14 years. She called it, once, to me, a private kingdom of small cruelties. Robert read her letters. This was before the phones. Diane is 62 now, so the surveillance of her generation was paper. He read the letters her own mother sent her. He went through her purse, not for money, for correspondence. And every elder in that congregation would have told you Robert Coleman was a fine spiritual man with a well-ordered house, because the well-ordered house is exactly what the watching is supposed to produce. Diane left in 2003, faded and then was disfellowshipped, and my whole family shunned her for 19 years. My own mother crossed her own sister out of her life completely, on instruction. So when I was a girl, Diane was the aunt who left, the one whose name I was told not to say at the dinner table. I did not understand until much later that she was not the warning, she was the map. And I have to tell you something I did myself, before I let you think I was only ever the one being watched. Because for a long time I was also one of the eyes. When I was 21, the year before my second loss, there was a younger sister, newly married, who said to me quietly at the literature counter that her husband had started reading her phone, and she did not know how she felt about it. And I told her she was blessed. I looked at that frightened girl, and I told her that a wife who has nothing to hide should be grateful for a husband who cares enough to look, that privacy is only pride wearing a nicer dress, that I would rather be fully known by my head than keep one corner of my heart that belonged only to me. I handed her the cage, and I told her it was a crown, because that is what had been handed to me. The system does not only make victims of you, it makes you into a hand that passes the thing forward. I think about that girl more than I think about almost anyone. Now I will tell you what I promised you. I will tell you about the night. It was 2022. I was 21. No, I was 22 by then. It was the spring after the second loss. We had a home study on Tuesday evenings, Trey and I, the two of us at the kitchen counter, going through a Watchtower study article the way married couples were encouraged to. The husband conducting, the wife commenting. And that night there was a paragraph. I will not pretend I remember the exact article. I remember the feeling of it. A paragraph about a wife's submission, and I asked a question. I did not argue. I asked one honest question about why the arrangement only ever seemed to run in one direction. Trey did not raise his voice. He never once raised his voice in 6 years, and I want that on the record, because the absence of shouting is exactly how they convince you that nothing is wrong. He closed the Watchtower. He prayed for me out loud, by name, asking Jehovah to soften my heart. And then he held out his hand for my phone. He sat on the edge of our bed, and I stood in the doorway, and he scrolled back. Not 5 minutes, months. He read 3 months of my messages slowly, some of them out loud. A text to a worldly coworker, a search I had made late one night, the tone of a message to my younger sister Hannah that he decided was too familiar. He was not angry. That is the thing I cannot make people understand. He was gentle, and he was grieved, and he was certain, and certainty with no anger in it is the most frightening thing I have ever stood across from. He was doing exactly what shepherd the flock of God and 40 years of service meetings had taught him a loving head does. He told me, when he was finished, that he loved me too much to let me keep a secret. And the next morning he called Brother Davis, and that call is the thread you can pull all the way to the back room of a judicial committee 2 years later. What Trey did not find, scrolling back those 3 months, was the one thing I had already learned to hide. Because by then, my Aunt Diane had found me. She had sent me one message, from an account I did not recognize, one sentence. When you are ready, I am here. And I had read it standing in the cosmetics aisle of a store off Memorial Drive, and I had memorized her number, and I had deleted the message before I got back to the car, and from that day, I only ever spoke to Diane on a borrowed minute, a coworker's phone at lunch, the computer at the DeKalb County Library, a payphone feeling in a smartphone world. I had built, inside 9 years of total visibility, one room with an actual door. It was the size of a closet. It was the first thing in my adult life that had ever been only mine. And the terror of keeping it, the deleting, the memorizing, the small daily lies, that terror is the exact measure of how completely everything else belonged to them. I did not have a word for any of it until I was 25. I was at the DeKalb County Library, the big one, and I was not even looking for it. I was looking for something about divorce, the legal kind, the worldly kind, and I picked up a book about controlling relationships, and there was a checklist in it, the kind a counselor uses. Monitors all communications, controls access to money, cuts the person off from family and friends, frames the control as love and protection. I read that checklist standing up in the aisle the same way I had read Diane's message standing up in an aisle, and I had to sit down on the floor of the stacks because there was a name for the thing. They call it coercive control. It is against the law in some places now. There is no scripture you can wrap around it that changes what it is underneath. I had been calling it headship for 9 years. The library gave it its real name in one afternoon. I live in Decatur now, in a 1-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor of an old brick building, a few minutes' walk from the MARTA. I built a bookshelf out of pine boards and cinder blocks the first winter I was here, before I could afford a real one. Aunt Diane comes over every other Saturday with sweet potato pie from a bakery on Memorial Drive, and we sit on the floor because I still have not bought a kitchen table, and she does not ask me about Trey, and she lets me say whatever I came to say. That is its own kind of privacy. To be in a room with a person who is not waiting to report you to anyone. My younger sister Hannah was baptized 2 years ago, at 19, the same age I was when I married. She still lives in our parents' house, and she has been told that I am a spiritual danger, and so we do not speak. She is the one I think about when I cannot sleep, the next young sister in our family who will be handed a phone and a husband and a rule, all three at once, and who may one day, years from now, go looking and find this. I am not allowed to call her, so I am saying it where she might hear it. The cloth-bound notebook is on the second shelf of that bookshelf. I kept it. I do not write and code in it anymore, but I had to learn how to stop. I sat down a few months ago to write something true, and I caught my own hand softening the sentence out of habit, burying the real thing under a nicer thing, writing for a reader who is not there. I had to stop and make myself put down the ugly, true sentence with no scripture on top of it. Nobody is allowed to open that notebook now. There is no head over me with a key to it. It took me 25 years to own one page that was only mine, and the first thing I learned was that I had forgotten how to be honest on it, because honesty needs a closed door, and I had never once in my life been given one. I am still learning. It is slow work. I want to say one thing about Trey, because I will not let this be a story about a monster. Trey was not a monster. Trey was a young black brother, 22 years old when he married me, who had been handed the exact same key his own father was handed, and his father before him, taught that a head who does not watch is a head who does not love, taught it in the same hall, by the same organization, out of the same manual. He read my phone the way a man reads a meter he has been told it is his job to read. He is remarried now, a girl of 19 from a congregation nearby. And somewhere in Atlanta tonight, there is a new young sister being handed a phone with one sentence attached to it, and I cannot save her. I could not even keep myself. All I can do is put the thing down on a page, with no code over it, and say it plainly. A woman wrote to me not long ago and said her husband had never once hit her, so she did not think what she lived through really counted. I have thought about her every day since. I want to answer her now, and not only her. If you grew up in a house where every message you sent could be read by the man God was said to have put over you, if you learned to write your own diary in a code so the watcher would find a faithful woman and not a frightened one, if you ever sat across a kitchen counter from a gentle man with no anger in his voice and felt more afraid than if he had shouted, if you ever deleted one message and then sat very still, waiting to find out whether anyone had seen, if you have one closet-sized room somewhere in your life that is the only thing that has ever truly been yours, I see you. You were not paranoid. You were not ungrateful. You were not proud for not ungrateful. You were not proud for wanting one private thought. You were a person, and a person is allowed a closed door, and they told you your whole life that you were not. The hall does not own you. I am the proof.